You have been told, directly or indirectly, that wanting more makes you selfish, that ambition is arrogance, that a woman who pursues more than what she already has is somehow ungrateful for what God has already given her. And somewhere along the way, you believed it. Not because it was true, but because it was repeated by people you trusted in spaces you respected. And over time, that message became so embedded in how you think about yourself that you no longer recognize it as a lie. You just called it humility. You are not humble. You are not being humble when you silence your desires. You are being obedient to a belief that was never yours to begin with. Today, we are dismantling that belief completely with scripture, with truth, and with the kind of honesty that might make you uncomfortable. Because it is going to require you to look at what you have been pretending not to want. Welcome back to MpoweredMe. I am Natasha Richards. This is where we talk about emotional intelligence, behavior transformation, and faith-filled growth, because healing is not just about feeling better. It is about becoming different. We are in June, and our theme this month is desire. Last week, we talked about why women pretend they do not want more. This week, we will go deeper, because it's one thing to admit you have buried your desires. It's another thing entirely to confront the belief system that buried them in the first place. So grab your pens, your papers, your journal. This is going to be one you require to write down some things. I want to start with two scriptures because I need you to hold both of them at the same time. Psalms 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." John 10:10 says, "I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly." Not barely, not just surviving, abundantly. Now, here is what I need you to notice. Neither of these scriptures tells you to be ashamed of your desires. Neither of them tells you to eliminate what you want. The instruction is to delight yourself in God, to align your desires with His heart, and to trust that the abundant life He promised is not a contradiction of your wanting. It is a destination of it. So the question is not whether desire is allowed. The question is why so many faithful, capable, God-fearing women have decided it is not allowed for them specifically. The enemy of your purpose is not your desire. It is the belief that your desire disqualifies you from God's favor. I want you to be honest with yourself for a moment. And I mean actually honest. Not the version of honesty that sounds spiritual and put together. Not that one. The real version. How many times have you talked yourself out of something you genuinely wanted? Not because God said no, not that one. Not because timing was wrong, not because you lacked the ability, but because wanting it made you feel selfish. How many times? You talked yourself out of applying for the promotion. You never launched the business. You put the book back in the drawer. You stopped yourself from asking for help because asking felt like a burden. You set a boundary and then immediately dismantled it because someone looked disappointed. You smiled and said, "I'm okay," while privately grieving the life you never gave yourself permission to pursue. That is not emotional maturity. That is emotional suppression. And suppression always has consequences. Mm. Here's what emotional intelligence teaches us about buried desire. When you repeatedly deny what you want, you do not eliminate that desire, you bury it. And buried desires do not stay quiet, they resurface, but they come back disguised. They come back as resentment toward people who are simply living with the courage you have not yet given yourself permission to have. They come back as envy you try to spiritualize, as burnout that will not lift no matter how much you rest, as quiet, chronic disappointment that you cannot fully explain and cannot fully shake. And here is the behavioral pattern I need you to see clearly. When you believe desire is selfish, you begin to unconsciously sabotage every opportunity that requires you to acknowledge your own value. You say no before anyone can reject you. You minimize your accomplishments so nobody thinks you are proud. You settle for environments that no longer fit because growth feels dangerous when you decide you do not deserve more. And then you wonder why you feel stuck. You are not stuck because you lack ambition. You are stuck because you have been disciplining yourself out of it. I want to ask you something, and I need you to sit with it before you answer. Don't rush past it. What have you been pretending not to want? Not because the desire is not there, but because admitting it would force you to confront what you are already afraid of. Afraid of failing, afraid of being seen, afraid of what people will say, afraid of succeeding and discovering it still is not enough. Afraid that wanting more somehow means you are not grateful for what you already have. Let me name some things, and I want you to pay attention to what happens in your body when I do. Ready? Maybe you want to finish the degree. Maybe you want to become financially stable, not just surviving, actually stable. Maybe you want a healthy relationship that does not require you to disappear inside of it. Maybe you want to speak on stages, write a book, start a ministry, launch a business. Maybe you want to finally prioritize your own healing without guilt. Now, what happened in your body just now? Because that reaction, whether it was a longing, a tightening, a sudden urge to qualify it, that reaction is telling you something important about where you have placed your own desires in the hierarchy of things that are allowed to matter. Listen, this issue is not whether you have the desire. The issue is that you have been labeling it as selfish before you have even examined it. Whew. Now, let's talk about where that belief comes from. Because it did not start with you. And understanding where it came from is the first step toward deciding whether you are going to keep letting it run your life. For many women, particularly women of faith, particularly women who were raised in communities where sacrifice was equated with holiness, the message was clear even when it was never stated directly. Good women do not ask for too much. Strong women do not need too much. Faithful women trust God and do not complain about what they do not have. And somewhere in the learning of all of that, which was not entirely wrong, a critical piece got lost. Nobody taught you the difference between coveting and desiring, between greed and vision, between discontentment and growth. Covetousness is wanting what belongs to someone else. Desire is pursuing what has been placed within you. Those are not the same thing. And conflating them has caused women, specifically women like you, an enormous amount of purpose. You were taught to surrender your desires to God, but somewhere in the teaching, you learned to surrender them before you even brought them to Him. My Lord. Let me show you what this looks like behaviorally, because this is where it gets specific. A woman who believes desire is selfish does not just think quietly about it to herself. She behaves in ways that consistently move her away from her own life. She overfunctions in relationships, giving more than she receives, staying longer than she should, shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She over-explains her goals because she has decided she needs to justify them. She performs gratitude publicly while privately grieving. And most painful part, she does not recognize it as a pattern. She calls it being a good person, a good mother, a good friend, a good Christian. She has reframed self-abandonment as a virtue, and that reframe is one of the most dangerous emotional patterns I encounter in coaching. There is a version of selflessness that is holy, and there is a version that is just self-erasure with a spiritual name attached to it. Here's what I want you to understand about behavior modification. You cannot change a pattern you have not named. And you cannot name a pattern you have decided is a virtue. So the work begins with being willing to call this what it actually is. Not humility, not contentment, not spiritual maturity. It is a learned belief that your desires do not deserve the same honor and attention as everyone else's. And that belief, left unexamined, will continue directing your behavior in ways that will keep you where you are. I want you to think about this. I want to tell you about something I had to learn in my own life. There was a season where I genuinely believed that wanting more for myself was evidence that I did not trust God enough. That if I just had enough faith, I would be at peace with exactly where I was. And I performed that peace for a long time in front of people who needed to see it. But privately, I was grieving something I would not let myself name out loud. And what I eventually understood after doing this work honestly is that grief was not a sign that I lacked faith. It was a sign that I had something in me that was supposed to grow, that was supposed to move, that was supposed to build something. And I had been calling that God-given drive selfishness for so long that I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. Contentment and resignation are not the same thing. One is peace, the other is the performance of peace. So you do not have to confront what you already actually are afraid of. Scripture is filled with examples of desires rightly directed. David desired to build a temple. Esther desired justice. Ruth desired belonging and provision. Paul desired to reach every nation. The call was never to eliminate the desire. The call was to examine it, steward it, and align it with wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Wanting to grow is not selfish. Wanting to heal is not selfish. wanting to lead well, use your gifts faithfully, build something that blesses others, or finally prioritize your own well-being, none of that is selfish. In fact, and I need you to hear this clearly, refusing to develop what has been entrusted to you carries its own kind of consequences. The parable of the talents is not a story about money. It is a story about what happens when you bury what you were given because you were afraid of what using it would require. Whew. Now, here is the part where I need you to do something. Not think about something, do something. I need you to say what you want out loud. Not the edited version, not the version designed to make other people feel comfortable, the real version. The desire that has been living underneath everything you've been settling for. Say it, write it down, give it a name. Because here is what I know about desires that refuse to be named. It does not disappear. It just goes underground. And underground desires become underground resentment. It becomes the bitterness you feel someone else gets what you would not allow yourself to pursue. It becomes the exhaustion of living a life that was designed around everyone else's permission and everyone else's comfort and everyone else's needs, while yours waited quietly and faithfully and then eventually stopped waiting at all. The saddest version of your story is not the one where you tried and failed. It is the one where you never admitted what you wanted because you were afraid of what it would mean if you did. Here is the work this week. 3 things, simple, specific. First, observe. Get a piece of paper and write down 5 things you actually want. Not what sounds responsible. Not what sounds humble. What you actually want. If it feels uncomfortable to write, good. That discomfort is data. That discomfort is showing you exactly where the work needs to go. Second, work. For each desire you wrote down, write this question next to it. Have I examined this or have I labeled it? Because there's a difference between a desire you have brought to God honestly and one you have dismissed before the conversation even started. Third, I want you to normalize. Practice saying one of those desires out loud this week to yourself, in your journal, in a prayer, without qualifying it, without disclaiming it, without shrinking it, right? Just say it plainly and let it exist without apology attached to it. That practice, small as it sounds, is a fundamental act of reclaiming your voice. And reclaiming your voice is how transformation begins. You do not have to perform contentment by pretending you do not want more. You can be deeply grateful for where you are and still faithfully pursue what is ahead. Those 2 things are not in conflict. If this video exposed something in you, if you realized you have been shrinking your desires and calling it humility or settling because it felt safer than stretching or performing gratitude while privately grieving the life you never gave yourself permission to want, I need you to take a step today, not next week. Come on, not when you feel ready. Today. The Live Awake 7-day reset is free. I'm giving it for free. 7 days of audio guidance, honest reflection, and real clarity about what you have been carrying, what you have been avoiding, and where things actually need to shift. It is not a list of action steps. It is 7 days of being honest with yourself in a structured way, maybe for the first time in a long time. Now, the link is in the description below. It costs you nothing except the willingness to tell yourself the truth. Go get it today. And then next week, we're talking about why visibility feels dangerous. Because many of you do not just hide your desires, you hide yourselves. And the cost of that invisibility is bigger than you have let yourself calculate. So, subscribe so you are there for that conversation. You do not have to spend another year pretending you do not want more. You can own the truth. You can work the process, and you can normalize the behavior that aligns with the life you are called to build. I'll see you next week.